Jimbo Paris, and you are listening to The Jimbo Paris Show. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jimbo Paris. Welcome again to The Jimbo Paris Show. So today we have Mr. Flynn, CEO, entrepreneur, as well as best-selling author. Now, he's a very successful man. He's a chief analyst, and he's done a lot of things in the business sector. And he could give you a lot of interesting nuggets of advice regarding your own business ventures as well for any new startup people here. So again, I definitely want to see what he has to say about all of this. So, Mr. Flynn, how are you?
Hi, Jimbo. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So, can you kind of give me a gist of what you specifically do?
Currently, I am considered called a business growth coach or a leadership team coach. So I work with the leader of the company, the head of the company, and his or her leadership team, and help them to fill in a growth framework over a year and a half to 2 years.
Interesting. Okay. And for me, as well as some of the people that don't know, what is a growth framework?
It's basically a set of steps that you take to align 3 areas of your business. One is the people side, the team, really focus on the team, the dynamic, making sure that it's an aligned team and a focused team, a disciplined team. And then it's also connecting strategy and execution together. And then having cash be your primary financial growth metric. So when you're looking to grow your business, you focus on how do you drive cash through the business versus revenue or even profit at times. So I help them, I run them through a series of meetings and exercises and conversations that help them over time to sort of lay that out and then validate, update it, and keep moving it forward.
Okay. And again, another simple question here, but what is the difference between cash and revenue?
Well, cash is the only thing on your balance statement or your profit and loss statement that won't lie to you. You can sort of come up with revenue, you can come up with profit, but you can't make up cash. You either have the money or you don't. So revenue is your top line, whatever is coming into the business through whatever means, and that can be it's different in different kinds of companies, depending on the kind of company that you are. It's just how much money are you getting from your clients to run your business or to fund your business. And then the costs, et cetera, to run your business, et cetera, will then get you to your gross profit, your net profit. But in the end, it's like after all the expenses have been taken care of, payroll and rent and electricity, whatever you have, whatever's left after all those expenses come out, taxes, etc., then that's what's left. What's left is cash. Okay. So they're really on the opposite sides of the spectrum of the financial viewpoint of the business.
That is really interesting because I don't know. I initially thought those were the same thing, but now that you explained it, I kind of understand now too. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's similar to sort of just your own personal life, right? You have income, you make income, either you work a job or you have your own business. So let's assume you have a job, you get a paycheck. And then of course you get taxes taken out of it and, health and benefits and all that kind of stuff. And then you whatever's left is your net income. And that's what you get to use to pay the rent or go out to dinner, whatever. And every month you sort of take the total amount of the net income minus all the expenses they have to pay in your personal life, and then you have cash left over, and then you can decide what to do with that cash, right? You can buy a new car, you can invest it in something else, you can save it. You have all these options that you can do with that. Same thing with a business.
Okay. Excellent. So I'm curious about you now. How long have you actually been in this industry?
I've been a coach sort of unofficially for 10 or 11 years, and then I made it my own business in 2015. So at the end of 2015. So that's 7 or so years ago is what I've been doing, how I've been doing it, and how long I've been doing it.
Wow. But you seem like a serious expert in this field. So you understood all of this and figured all this out during those 7 years?
No, and I can't necessarily say I've figured everything out either. I'm learning and a student of it just as much as others are. But I did startups for about 25 years. So I helped start 10 companies over that time frame, all in the high tech space. And I was generally, in an operations role, sales, marketing, service, that kind of stuff. And I made a ton of mistakes and bad decisions and things. And hopefully I've learned from them. I've taken that. And then I've always been a student of business. I've read a lot of books. I've watched a lot of, TED Talks and videos and gone to conferences and just tried to figure out, what, if any, are there commonalities among the companies that do really well over long periods of time. And that's sort of what I put into my book. And it's not something I necessarily figured out. It's, I read management thinkers, science, the science of management that's been around for about 100 years. And these are people like Drucker and Deming and Shine and Bennis and McGregor and a whole bunch of other folks. And more recently, people like Jim Collins and Marcus Buckingham and Pat Lencioni and people like that who've really taken it to another level. Or really just often reminded us of the things that were said, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. So it's been a long journey. I've really focused on that in the last 6 or 7 years. And that's, I've found that it's really an interesting situation because most businesses fail. If you look at the data, about half of the businesses that are started end 5 years after they start. And it keeps getting worse. The data that I've seen is up to 25 years, and about 16 or 17% of those businesses are left after 25 years. So you'd think that people would get better and learn and improve and et cetera, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So, people go out of business. But then I said, what are the companies that have made it, right? That not only have survived the 25 years, but thrived in the 25 years? Because there's this, there's sort of the black and white of surviving or not. And then there's, if you survived, are you thriving? And most of them are not thriving. Most of them are struggling. So I really wanted to look at also the ones that are thriving and were there commonalities in those. And that's what sort of I found. That's what's in my book, focusing on team and strategy, execution, and then cash.
I see now why you call yourself the business growth coach. So this is what drove you to kind of focus in more on kind of growing these businesses, right?
Yeah, it's about scaling them, right, in a healthy way. A lot of businesses grow, but there's a great quote that I often say, which is growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell, and cancer cells are not generally kind to their hosts. So you want to grow in a thoughtful way, in a deliberate way. And that's what I think most folks don't do. They grow to grow, and then they don't see that, some of the decisions that they're making, they may regret further down the line because they violated who they are or what's important to them or what they're good at or what their core customer really values. And they were just chasing revenue as opposed to really trying to build a healthy business.
That's a really, really interesting thing you said there, because most entrepreneurs would think all growth is good, and that may not be the case. And before I kind of get into this, how did you sort of learn that lesson about sort of good growth and bad growth? You didn't use those words, but that's sort of how I understood it.
Yeah. It probably didn't really occur to me until I started paying a lot of attention to those management thinkers that I was talking to you about before. And then you start to look at companies that are growing, and we celebrate the revenue, right? It's fun to say that this company's this big or has grown this much, and it's great to talk about. But there's a saying that I have heard and quote often, which is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity and cash is king. So, if you want to brag to your brother-in-law or you want to get in a newspaper article, then great. It's talk about the revenue. It's easy. People understand it. But if you're not running a healthy business, then, so let's say you're running $100 million business and it's cost you $100 million to run the business. Now, you've done a few good things, right? You've employed a bunch of people. You've probably made some great products for people, et cetera. But what you're at risk at is something that happens often and too often. So in this century, we've already had 3 really big economic crises, right? We've had 9/11, we've had 2008 recession, and then we've had COVID. So if you don't have a lot of cash and you're not generating cash in your business, so it costs you $100 million, and let's say from 2001 to 2008, that's 7 years, and you grew a business from $50 to $100 million, but you didn't put any money away, and you didn't invest that money back into the business and learning more, then when a recession hit, you may have been in a really difficult situation, right? And we saw that with the airline industries, right? They basically said, I'm out of money, I can't do this, and in other industries as well.
Yeah.
So it's something that we don't see because it's sort of behind the scenes of who the healthy companies are. We see the flashy, newsworthy stuff about growing really big, etc. So that's sort of what I've seen.
Okay. So you went into sort of the growth aspect, but what are some of the other problems or mistakes you see a lot of entrepreneurs making as well besides that?
There are a number of things that I don't think they necessarily they do wrong, but they do partially wrong. Maybe
Partially.
I don't think it's very rare that you do something completely and absolutely incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start to do a number of things incorrectly over time, they add up, right? And that's what happens to a lot of businesses, I think, is that these minor mistakes pile up and start to slow the business down, right? So for instance, you hire badly. You hire someone that you realize isn't a good fit, but you don't either move them to a better fit or move them out of the company. And then they hire someone. And what they say is if you're a C player, you're not going to hire A players, right? Because then they'll make you look bad. So then you have this part of the business that isn't sort of working very well. You don't really solve a problem that's worth solving, or you don't solve it as well as you could. And then that becomes an issue for you as well. You don't really understand why your customers buy from you. I think that's another thing that people don't do well. Similar to this first point that I made, but in a larger context is, if you look at your team and now that you've been together for a number of months, number of years, I ask a question, which is, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team now that you know who they are? And very often that answer is no. But they stay anyway, right? People are generally nice and we want to take care of others. But it isn't, by keeping one person, you're impacting all the other people on the team often. And, then there's obviously the fear of that person has industry knowledge or tribal knowledge or whatever, and you don't want to get rid of them, especially if they're in sales and they're really often what happens is a really good salesperson, but they're sort of a toxic person within the organization. So there are a number of things like that we don't do as well as we could. We don't focus on those things.
So I think we talked a lot about the things many entrepreneurs do wrong, but what do you think are the things entrepreneurs do well, or as you would say, partially well?
Yeah, so the ones that do well really do a few things really well. And one is they understand that performance is a team sport, right? Mm. And they understand how to attract and to bring on board and grow a well-rounded team. And a well-rounded team is often made up of idiosyncratic, spiky people, right? We're not really well-rounded as human beings. We generally skew towards our abilities. And to have a teamwork, you've got to have people with different types of abilities that are working really well. I think a really good analogy is sports in this situation, especially team sports. I'm in the New England area, so the Patriots, I think, have shown that over 20 years that they were really good at taking a lot of different people and continually doing well with different people, right? They've won 7 Super Bowls, etc., over 20 or 6 Super Bowls over 20 something years, and it wasn't the same people who did it over those 20 years. It was very few, and the only person who was really the same one was Tom Brady. I think after 10 years, he was the only one left from all of the other previous wins when they won the next one. So really understanding how to do that in business is great. And we don't teach people how to do those things, how to attract and build and grow and develop a great team. But those that do really well understand that. The other things that they do well is they understand that having a really simple and effective strategy is important. And they have to sort of understand what is strategy first. When I ask and I've talked to hundreds of CEOs in speaking engagements and such, and I would ask that question a lot, and I would get different answers back, even from very accomplished people who are running large companies, etc. So really understanding what strategy is, which to me is a really good strategy, is about being different, not about being better than someone else. If you want to be better than someone else as your main motivator, that's super hard to do, because you're just always a little bit better, and they're going to get better, and then you have to get a little bit better, etc. But if you can differentiate yourself in such a way that it's hard for them to duplicate what you do, that makes it a lot easier. So an example that is often used, and I use it often, is the Southwest Airlines, which many in the United States know, and it's a pretty well-known airline around the world as well. They have a very simple strategy, and it's been copied many times, but no one's been able to do it exactly the way they do it. So when I was younger, we had Song and Continental Light and TED, and these were supposedly things that they wanted to compete against Southwest, and they couldn't do it. Now we have Spirit and Frontier, and they're struggling as well. So there's something unique about what Southwest is doing that's allowed them to be really a well-run company. And until COVID happened, they were profitable every year for 40 some odd years, 48, 49 years, in an industry that you're well known to go out of, to run out of money often, right? Airlines are often asking the government for money, which is too bad. The other things that they do really well is they execute really well. They understand that discipline and rigor is important, and they understand how to have clear, specific objectives that line up over a period of time to grow as we go. And then lastly, I think that other thing is they have enough money in the bank and they're investing their money well. They're making bets. They're highly profitable. Apple, when they first became $1 trillion company, they had about 7% or so market share in their industry, but they had about 70% of the profit that came into it. They have more money in the bank than some countries. So I think those things are what leaders do really well, that have that sort of enduring quality of a business that works really well over a long period of time.
And I think there was this certain quote that you said, how do entrepreneurs deal with problems that create problems that are in front of them, right? And how is that supposed to work? And what does that have to do with sort of the execution you mentioned towards the end of your last answer? Because I think that would be interesting too.
Yeah, the quote that I use, and I don't know who said it, and I might have made it up, I have no idea, is that really great leaders don't focus on continually solving the problem that's in front of them. They focus on solving the problem that creates the problem that's in front of them. So if you keep moving back to the problem that's creating the problem, and you figure out why that is, you'll get to a root cause. And when you can modify the root cause, then you've taken that out of the equation. Right. And there's a good example, Expedia, which is a travel site here in the US and internationally. They found they were losing lots of money because people weren't getting their itineraries right. They weren't getting their itineraries delivered to them, etc. So they would get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails, etc. And they found out that that would cost them millions of dollars because they were so big at the time. And they finally said, what we need to do is figure out how do we get these people to get their itineraries on their own as much as we can. And they saved tens of millions of dollars by solving that problem. They didn't just try to figure out a faster way to get their itinerary or hire more people or whatever. They kept looking back to why does this keep happening? So that's the one thing that I do. That if you sort of work from first principles, that's sort of an example of it, going back to the root cause, then you have a better chance of making it easier to run the company. And I think some of those first principles I've already mentioned, right, around the team that you have, and really creating a great team environment and leading a team really well is a principle that many great leaders leverage. Which, again, if you do that really well, it makes your life a lot easier because you don't have to then manage them, right? If you lead them and create an environment where they're running the business on the day-to-day, you don't have to step in very often. Your job is, what I say to my clients all the time is, at some point, you might start the business or come into the business. At some point, your job is to stop running the day-to-day of your business, your part of the business. Your job is to start thinking about the future of the business and of your team, right? How can I make my team more efficient, more effective? Do I have the right people in the right seats? Are we doing the right things? Are we contributing to the organization in the way that we should? You keep asking these questions of yourself, and then you'll continually try to improve things and take yourself more and more out of the equation. Because the hardest thing, especially the leader, the top of the company, the hardest thing you have to do is predict the future. And predicting the future is really impossible, but you can create your own future. And so you can sort of predict it through its own creation. I think Abraham Lincoln or someone has attributed to that quote, right? The best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. And that's really what I try to get my clients to do, is really think about in detail, at least 3 years out. What are the things that we need to do? What are the most important things that allow us to make sure we have a differentiated strategy? What do we have to do more of, less of, better, or start doing that we're not doing? And then put down, write down all those things that we need to get done and who needs to get them done, which then drives our execution and our operational side of the business over that time frame. And you just keep moving that 3 years forward. Every year we move to the next 3 years and the next 3 years. By moving 1 year ahead at a time.
You mentioned 3 years quite a bit. Is there anything special or significant about 3 years, or is that just sort of a number?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't think there's anything magical about 3. It really depends on the kind of business that you're in. I think if you're in a really fast moving business, 3 years might be too long, right? But if you're in a more slow moving business, maybe 3, 4, 5 years is okay. But 3 years seems to be about the amount of time that we can have some level of confidence that we can, if we do these things, then they'll happen within this time frame. And again, if you just keep rolling it forward every year, it's where 5 or 10 years is a little too far out. I think those are great for doing exercises of brainstorming, etc. And because it takes pressure off. But in most businesses, the year that they're in is generally already baked. They already kind of have an idea what they're doing, and that really influences the next year. But maybe bigger changes can be made over a 3-year time frame that has a greater impact on your longer term growth.
Okay. Thank you for answering that, because I was just curious about that a bit. So you have another quote, and I think it was, "Accomplish much, fail many, but learn many useful lessons." Now,
yeah, that's in my bio. Yeah, that's sort of what I say is I've been relatively successful in the startup world, not me myself, but part of a group of people for that success. Where over those 10 startups, 5 of them would be considered successful, at least within a certain period of time, where there was an IPO or an acquisition, of significance. And so I've learned a lot there. And along the way, I did things wrong and made bad decisions, but hopefully learned from them, and brought them to the next thing that I did, and hopefully made that a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And then, what I like to say to my clients is, I'll do my best to have you make your own mistakes. If there's anything that I've seen that I've done that I might want to bring to your attention, so you don't make the same mistake I did, I will do that as well. And I would do that with my team when I was running teams.
But again, and while I do sort of see you as, a strategist in a sense, how do you think your clients develop this type of self-awareness? Do you try to teach them that self-awareness, or do you sort of look more into the business and sort of figure out what's going on? Because learning how your leadership is, your executive ability, that takes a lot of very good introspection. So do you sort of help them with that, or do you teach them how to help themselves with that?
Yeah, I don't know that I specifically teach them. So I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek, so I weave that into it. And, I let them know that at least as much as we know about the brain today, and I'm certainly no expert, but I have been reading about it and studying it for years and maybe even decades. So I let them know that, this is sort of what's going on. Because sometimes we don't even realize that we're creating an issue with someone else, right? We don't realize. I like to say we put people into threat mode inadvertently more often than we think. So I'll teach them that sort of stuff. So for instance, one of the stories I tell all the time is, and I'll sort of use you in this scenario, is, let's say, you and I are in a company together, and you're my boss, and I'm running a meeting of our team because you asked me to do that, and you sort of were observing, etc. And the meeting went pretty good. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. And very often what has happened, is different now in this whole, remote and hybrid, etc. But when people are always in the office, what would happen often, and it's certainly happened to me, is, you might get tapped on the shoulder. You might tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Bill, can you follow me back to my office? I have some feedback I want to give you for this meeting." And then what happens is my brain starts to go into threat mode because I don't really know what you're going to say. There might be people in the room. So now I have this social issue, right? Is, what are people going to think about me? They're going to think I'm in trouble, or I did something wrong, so I'm sort of thinking about that from the social aspect. And then I follow you back to your office, and I'm sort of walking, beside you or behind you. And now my brain is sort of catastrophizing, right? It's like, what did I do wrong? And what's going to happen? And, what if I get fired? And if I get fired, how am I going to pay the rent or send the kids to college, or, whatever, this is what the brain does, right? The brain is constantly trying to protect you. So it's thinking about all these crazy scenarios on your behalf, so to speak. And this person who, you tapped me on the shoulder, and you didn't really realize that by the time I sit down in front of you in your office, which is a status symbol, because it's your office, and you sit behind your desk, which is another status symbol, which also protects you, right? You're physically separated from me, and I'm in a chair, probably completely exposed, right? So our brain is going crazy at this point. And whatever you say next, I might hear you, I might not hear you, but I probably won't remember much of the conversation because my brain my heart is pumping. My might be sweating a little bit because your brain is telling your body, go, run away, right? Save yourself, because our brain isn't really good at separating what a physical threat is versus a social threat. There've been some studies done when you have a physical threat and a social threat and what parts of the brain light up, and they're generally the same parts. So the brain doesn't really know the difference. And if you think about it, your brain is just sitting in the dark silence, right? It's using information from in your body and outside your body to help it make decisions for you. And at this point, it's thinking that, there's a saber-toothed tiger or a woolly mammoth or something that's going to get you. So that's something that I would teach them, right? Because a lot of people don't really understand that the intentions of you tapping me on the shoulder were probably good.
Yeah.
But my brain doesn't know the difference. So what you could have done, which may have been a better way to do that, or at least more brain friendly, if you will, is you could have waited till everyone left the room, sat down next to me, and said, "Hey, Bill, how do you think that meeting went?" And I could say, it was pretty good. There were parts that I thought went well. There were other parts that didn't go as well. And you could say, I think so too. Let's do this. Why don't you put some time on my calendar, a coffee or lunch or whatever, before the next meeting. And then what I'd like you to do is come to that meeting with a few things that you thought went really well and that we should do more of or expand upon. Maybe bring one or two things that you didn't think went very well, maybe with some ideas on how to fix that. I'll do the same thing. And then you and I will meet every week until we agree that this is the best version of this meeting we could possibly have. Mm-hmm. Now, that status thing went away, right? There's a more certainty with me. Now I sort of know I have control, I have autonomy. You're treating me sort of like a peer. We're doing this together, even though you're sort of my boss, and that seems like a fair thing to do, right? So my brain is less likely to go into that threat mode if I handle that situation that way versus the other way.
Right? I really, really like that example because you just sort of broke down empathy in a very unique kind of scientific, well, sort of just your way, and I definitely will be quoting that after this show. But again, that was a really, really cool example you just showed there.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Now, I think the next question I have, because again, you have a lot of extensive experience as a startup entrepreneur. How do companies sort of succeed in startups nowadays?
So because I've done so many startups, and I've been working with startups in other capacities besides an operational role, I get asked a lot, or I don't get asked as much now, but I was getting asked a lot, by founders, what advice do you give? You've done 10 startups, you've had 5 successes, which is well above average. And again, not my successes, but I was involved in those. And I always give the same advice, which is when you're first starting out, is you want to focus on only 2 things, in my opinion, where you spend most of your time and energy. And that is make sure that you're solving a problem that's worth solving in a way that who you believe are your best customers will pay you enough money to make a real business out of it. The second thing is don't run out of money. And usually the first one takes care of the second one. Sometimes it doesn't. What most founders do is they fall in love with the idea and not with the problem. And what they do is they go around and they try to convince other people that their idea is a great idea. And I often like to say is that your customers really don't care what you do, but they do care about what you do does for them, right? It's a self-interest. So your job is to, again, back to this sort of empathy, compassion thing, right? You should be compassionate. You should work with your customers and talk to them as if you're a journalist, right? Or as if you're an interviewer, right? Where you have no stake in the outcome necessarily, except a really good conversation, but you can learn a lot of stuff. And, when I talk to folks and they say, well, how do I have that conversation? I said, your job is to get them to complain and talk about their problems as much as you can and in much detail as you can, right? So the example I like to give again is Apple, right? Steve Jobs was really good at really putting himself in other people's shoes, really being super curious about technology and how it helps people and how it makes their lives better. So the scenario I make up, I have no idea if this is what happened, but let's assume it did, right? So he would talk to people and maybe come to you and say, and this was a long time ago, so why do you have that Walkman, right? So why do you have that Sony Walkman? What does it do for you? How does it make your life better? And they say, well, I love having my own music with me. It's I don't have to disturb other people with a radio and have earphones, whatever it might be. And then he said, okay, so where does it let you down? And let's assume we're doing like the CD version of it, right? And people would say, well, it's kind of big and bulky. I have to carry it on carry it around and put it on my waist. If I'm running or moving in some way, it skips. The laser will skip. I have to have all these CDs, that I have access to. I only really like 2 or 3 songs and every CD. So that's a problem. I can certainly burn them onto a CD, etc. But still, they only hold so much. And so he would ask them these questions, and eventually he got to, they wanted to have about 1,000 songs fit in their pocket, right? And then that's what he did. He went back to his team and said, okay, this is sort of what the market is really looking for. They're not looking for a better version of a Sony Walkman. They're looking for a way to easily access the songs that they want and have it fit in their pocket. And MP3s were already a thing, so and they did a really good job at that time. Now, he didn't solve the whole problem, because obviously we wouldn't have Pandora and Spotify if Apple had solved the entire problem, right? So listening to music, people hire products and services to do a job for them. And in the case of this, it was to listen to music. And in some cases, it was listen to music depending on the mood that I was in, right? So Pandora and Spotify would offer that, sort of the types of songs, and you can like them or dislike them depending on the channel that you put them in. They'd also offer up new music. That's another thing, is how do I discover new music? So they found these other issues that weren't quite solved by Apple. And nowadays, there's no such thing as an iPod or an MP3 player, right? It's in your phone, or you just play it on your laptop or whatever. So, that's really the problem we're solving is doing that. It's not making a better Walkman or a better device. It's helping these people really make progress in their lives by solving problems and having them solve a job or provide a job in the highest possible way for them to make progress in their lives, or to get over a struggle that they're dealing with.
Okay, so from what I can understand, you're saying more so, and I think this goes back to what you said a lot about growth too. Further, improving the Walkman, that's just sort of growth in the wrong direction. What you need to do is you need to sort of scale it in the right direction, which is more along the lines of solving the specific problem that the consumer has.
Yeah. So there's a theory out there called jobs to be done. It's been around for about 30 years. And it incorporates something called the theory of progress. And there are 4 stages to the theory of progress. And the ones that we're very familiar with are the stages that move us toward something. But there are also 2 stages that move us away from something, right? Back to this brain that's trying to protect us and likes the status quo a lot, is that you'll have habit is a factor. We don't do new things because we like the comfort, and our brain likes the comfort of the familiar. And then, of course, there's anxiety, right? There's, what if it doesn't work? And what if I don't know how to do it? Or what if I look stupid doing it? Or whatever it might be. And we often solve the problem at the top, really moving people towards progress relatively well. This is about marketing and, planting an idea that your life could be better. Here's an example of how that could happen. But we rarely look at the habit and anxiety. If we could take that out of the equation, that would be great. And there's a story that I have in the book, which I like, which I think tells as well, as there's a gentleman who was selling condos, and one of his core customers were empty nesters. So he made these condos, and he asked them what they wanted, and he made condos the way they wanted, and they did well for a while, but then things sort of stalled. And he went back and he tried to figure out what was stalling them, what was getting in the way, especially the ones that were close to buying and then didn't. And he found that the dining room table kept coming up over and over again. And he sort of dug into this dining room table. What's about this dining room table? And what was happening is that most of these folks they had families, and a lot of the living of the family, and a lot of the memories of the family were around the dining room table, was sitting around having meals, etc. And it felt wrong to just dump the dining room table, right? So they didn't move because they didn't know what to do with the dining room table. So he helped them figure that out. He actually redesigned some of the units. So they sort of shrunk a bedroom and made the dining room a little bit bigger, so people could actually bring it with them if they wanted. And they also made sort of a sorting room. So for all these memories, one of the things that he didn't want to do is just get rid of all the issues, or it was too hard to have the kids come in and grab stuff that they wanted. So they said, oh, you can move and you can, for 2 years, keep your stuff here, and we'll help you sort it out. And then you can have the kids come in and take the stuff that they want and what they don't want, or family or friends, and then the things that don't make it, you can decide what to do with them. And then each time they did those two things, the dining room table and the sorting room, the sales went up because they started to take some of these negative things, these lack of progress items like having anxiety, out of the equation. So I think that's what helps when you're thinking about making a successful company, is really thinking about the steps of progress, but also the steps that inhibit progress.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of your best collaborative business experiences? And kind of going back to sort of what you said at the end there, did these collaborative experiences sort of lead to steps that sort of moved your progress forward, or did they inhibit your progress?
I think it depends on how you do. So collaborative things often involve some sort of thinking, brainstorming, coming up with new ideas. Mm-hmm. And there are better practices, I think, for doing that. So for instance, brainstorming, when I first learned about brainstorming, it was, you sort of get into a room and then you ask a question, and then whoever speaks first controls the conversation. Right. And it's usually an extrovert who has just, they think off the top of their head, etc. But the best way to do brainstorming is actually to have everyone sit silently and write things down. Right. So you say, hey, we're trying to come up with all sorts of ideas for this new product that we're trying to come out, or this new market. And then you say, okay, come up with, 3 or 4 of your own ideas, what you think might be good, etc. And then you put those things up, you organize them in a certain way. You might group them because they're categorical, etc. And then you start talking about it. Because there's something, again, back to the neuroscience, when you're in a situation where someone speaks up, there's something called anchoring, where whatever they say puts your brain into that mode and you're thinking about that, and it makes it hard for you to think about anything else. And, there's sort of a joke, Jimbo, don't try not to think about a white polar bear in a snowstorm. Right? As soon as I say that, you can't help but think about it, right? Mm-hmm. Because I planted that thing in your brain. So the best collaborative situations are where that happens. And then as a leader, I think, leaders often try to protect their teams and try to help them a lot. And sometimes we do it as a disservice. So for instance, you might go in and say, hey, I had this idea about, and they would spew their idea out. And then they'd say, what does everybody think? Now, so the leader is saying this. And then what do you think happens? Everybody thinks it's a great idea. Right. And that's not your job as a leader. Your job isn't to validate your own thoughts and processes. Sometimes you might be right. Sometimes you might be wrong. Sometimes you might be partially right. Your job is to get the best ideas out of the team. So instead of coming in and saying, I had this great idea, saying, hey, I had this thought that we're not, we could be doing a better job here in this situation. Talk about that. What do people think, et cetera. And then say, okay, great. Again, let's everybody write down what are some ideas that you would come up with that could potentially improve that situation. And then one of the ideas might be his or hers, but there might be a whole slew of ideas that either in combination or separately would be the better version, right? Your job is to have the best ideas win, not what the hippo in the room. And the hippo is an acronym for the highest paid person. And often the highest paid person in the room wins. And that isn't necessarily because they have the best idea. It's just because they have the authority, or they've sort of taken over the conversation prematurely. So that's, I think, if you think about those, that's how when you have the best collaborative efforts. And that's what I try to do with my clients, is to get them to have good collaborations. As I say, we're going to fill in a 1-page plan. We're going to do core values and core purpose, and 3-year planning and 1-year planning and priorities and metrics and all this stuff. So, but the most important thing that we're doing here is getting you guys to talk to each other, to fight in a healthy way, to disagree on stuff, and then come out and commit to something, knowing that it might be right, it might be wrong, it might be partially right, it might be partially wrong, but then say, let's commit to it and give it a chance. And then we can revisit it and say, did it work? Did it not work? Okay, what would we do differently next time? That's when you have the best collaborative effort. That's when the best ideas are birthed and implemented, I think.
So you would encourage more of your clients to be more on the extroverted end, speaking first, to sort of become that, well, it may not help them become that hippo in the room, but you would encourage that sort of as a first step, maybe?
So not speak first, except to frame the problem, right? Let's say, we're trying to fix this situation. It's not working well. Our numbers are going down, etc. And instead of getting right to let's come up with solutions for this, make sure you understand the problem completely, and then work with them. So that's where the leader is to sort of set direction and guidelines, if you will, not to give the answer on a regular basis, right? They may have to make the final decision at some point if somehow there's two factions that are really fighting against each other. At some point, you might say, look, no new information is being done here. Maybe we need to go back and look at stuff differently and then revisit this. Or you might have to say, you know what, let's just pick one and move ahead. I think, sometimes we get our heads wrapped around certain things and we can't make a decision, right? It takes too long to make a decision. Sometimes it's better to just, depending on the kind of decision you're making, it's better to get some information, maybe the critical information, then make a decision knowing that you can reverse it later and just keep moving ahead, right? Keeping an eye on it, etc. If it's irreversible or really expensive to reverse, then you might want to spend more time. But too often, I think we spend far too much time on not high value decisions, low value decisions that take forever. And part of that's because we want to make the team feel good. There's consensus. And I'm not a big fan of consensus. I don't think you should have consensus. The best idea should win. You shouldn't make everybody happy. Sometimes people will be happy in one situation. Sometimes the other people will be happy. But if you can do it on the merit of the idea, then that's a better way to go than trying to water the idea down so much that everybody leaves the room and say they get a little bit.
Yeah. Because that's another really interesting point, because I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, at least, they have, and even I'm guilty of this, there's two different ideas, and it's not necessarily about making one group happy or the other group happy. It's more about thinking about the greater good, making the business altogether better. And that's a really good piece of advice as well.
Yeah, I often have people switch sides, right? Say, great, so you think this is strong. So how would you argue the other side, right? And that helps to take a little bit of the emotional momentum out of it, right? Because we fall in love with our own ideas, whether it's a founder or someone that's not a founder, right? And then we get emotionally attached to it, and we sometimes irrationally try to support it. And so if you could take them away from that and say, hey, really good stuff. Now argue the other side. Just switch seats. And that helps them to get a little more perspective, right? Again, back to that empathy, or maybe just a little more understanding, and that helps you as well with getting better ideas.
Excellent. And concerning all of this, I think we're getting to a really interesting question here that I have for you. Skill set versus mindset. Which do you think is more important?
So it depends on the situation, but often I might reframe it a little bit, is that we have, if you're looking to hire someone, they probably need a minimum skill set, but we often try to maximize the skill set. And then we hire someone who has what we think is they're gonna start with you got to hit the ground running, right? Or they really get up to speed quickly, etc. But if nobody likes them or nobody wants to work with them, maybe the first few months will go well because there'll be some speed and velocity to whatever they're doing. But then they'll be cut out of stuff and people won't interact with them, or they'll create a bad dynamic within the group. So that's where, sort of having that fit, that mindset, if you want, in your language, or some people call it a cultural fit, whatever it might be. I think in the long term, you want to hire people who believe what you believe, who generally have the same values that you have and want to help you to achieve your vision. And you can teach them the skills and you can give them the knowledge on the way. But I think we skew too much towards skills and knowledge as a primary way to bring someone on board or do something. And that's, I think, good in the short term. and again, we're short-term beings, so it's a weird situation, right? It's like, oh, he really hit the ground running, he's great, but then a year from now, everybody hates this guy, and that's not good, right? And then what happens is you end up firing him, and then you have to start again. So I think it's not one or the other, is sort of the way you said it. I think you have to have a minimum level of skill depending on the job. If you're an entry level job, you don't have any skill, right? That's fine. You can teach them pretty quickly how to answer a phone or do data entry or whatever. But if it's a little more involved, you want to have at least sort of this minimum level of skill, and then really focus on, I like to say, do what's called the airplane test, right? Once you got to know them a little bit, and talk to them, how would you feel if you got stuck in an airport with this person for 3 or 4 hours? Would you be excited to be able to chat with them and learn about them, and etc.? Or would you be completely in your phone or in your book for 4 hours, right? And if it's the second thing, that's probably an indicator that they might not be a good fit.
Okay. That's an interesting perspective, because I would assume most people would say skill set, but you said mindset, because more so in the long term, it's more important that the person has similar values, because you could always get those skills usually.
Yeah. You can train them, you can send them to class, you can do all those things. You can't make someone be honest. You can't make someone be curious. I shouldn't say that. You can. It's probably a really significant investment, to make someone more creative or more curious. And wouldn't it be a lot easier to find people who already come to the job highly curious, highly creative, highly innovative, highly collaborative, than try to turn them into that? That's just a lot of effort.
Okay. Now, getting back to you on a more personal level, what are some of the 3 biggest things you do for your morning routine?
You have been asked this question before. I don't necessarily have a morning routine, because my mornings are different depending on if I'm with a client or whatever. Some of my days are free, etc. But I actually broke my leg about 6 months ago, so my morning routines changed dramatically, and I'm still getting back to the old stuff. But I would generally get up in the morning. I would eat. I usually wake up hungry. I would do that, and depending on the day, I would either exercise, either go to the gym and work out, or do something. Unless it was a hockey day, I'm a hockey player. If I'd play hockey at night 2 or 3 times a week, which is great exercise. And then often I'd either read or write, because a lot of my job as a coach is to keep filling myself with knowledge and perspectives and stories and things. So I would sort of do that as sort of my morning routine.
Okay, great. Now, another question, and feel free to bring hockey into this, because I'm interested in this, but who coaches the coach? Have you ever had any mentors anywhere in life that sort of made you the man you are today?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I've certainly had people that I respected and I tried to learn from, but it wasn't necessarily a formal sort of mentor-mentee relationship or coach-coachee. I had a few people early on, some great CEOs and great people that I worked with, even people that I worked, not in for, but with, and try to learn from them as well. And now what I do is I have a handful of other coaches that are in organizations that I've become friendly with, and we'll do a conversation once a month. So I'll have 4 or 5 or 6 of these conversations a month with different people, and we'll run things by each other. We'll sometimes challenge each other. We'll ask, whatever it might be. Sometimes we help each other, hold each other accountable, that type of thing. So I try to make sure I do that often, because when you work for yourself, you can get sort of insulated, and it's good to have people, give people permission to say, hey, I have this idea. I need you to tell me how stupid it is, right? Where is it not gonna work, as opposed to say, hey, I have this really idea. What do you think? Because they're gonna then say, oh, that seems like a really good idea, and you don't really know if they're giving you the truth, the kind truth, or not.
Okay.
So I like to surround myself with different kinds of folks, and there are different kinds of people. Some are very technically oriented. Some are, much more, they have a bigger personality than I have. Some are more extroverted than I am. And I think that, I try to surround myself with people like that to help me where I'm usually not as strong, to make sure that I'm sort of kept honest, if you will.
Excellent. Okay. So we're going to bring up your website quickly here. Can you kind of tell us about some of the services you offer and your book, Faster and Faster as well, Further and Faster?
Yeah. So what I do as a coach is I do two things at a highest level. One is I'm a leadership team coach. And so that means I work with the CEO or the head of the company and his or her team and help them to grow their business in a healthy and thriving manner, right? And that's really what the primary portion of what my website is about. I also do one-on-one coaching to executives, either a head of a company or usually someone that reports to them. I don't do as much of that, but that's sort of my high level. And then I did, I sort of call myself an accidental author. I wrote a book about 2 years ago. I had never any intention of writing a book. I don't really like to write. There are people that I know that are writers, and I'm not a writer. And so I hired a team of people to help me do that. And out came what is, Further Faster, which is basically applying the Pareto principle, or what's more commonly known as the 80-20 rule, to business. And it's not everything that you can do, but it's the things that I think if you did this, you'd give yourself the best chance of moving, again, further, faster. The vital few steps that take the guesswork out of growth. And those words were chosen specifically because the 80-20 rule is known as the law of the vital few. One of my favorite sayings is, few things truly matter, but those that do matter tremendously. And your job as a leader or a friend or a parent or whatever is to really figure out the few things that truly matter in that relationship or that situation and focus the time and energy on that, because you'll have outsized results if you focus on those few things, as opposed to getting distracted by the shiny object or the tyranny of the moment, the current crisis, whatever it might be.
All right. Okay, well, this has been an excellent interview, Mr. Flynn. It's been a privilege. Are there sort of any final words, any last remarks you'd like to give to the audience before I let you off here?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess sort of a little self-promotion is, love, if you thought this was interesting, you can download my book for free if you want from my website. You can also go to Amazon or Audible and pay something. I get a few dollars every time somebody downloads my book from or orders my book from there. Or if you want to chat further, you can. My information is on there. My contact info. There's a calendar link, etc. Happy to chat with you about either of those situations if you think there's an opportunity for me to help you coach your team, or if you're looking for yourself or someone on your team to have a one-on-one coach and you think that my philosophy and my approach might click with that person, then great. I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. So again, just for a few shout outs, LifeWork Systems, this is our affiliate and collaborative partner. She is an HR superstar, and she essentially works on helping corporate businesses improve their business infrastructure by helping relationships, teaching things like empathy, like what we talked about here quite a bit, and a lot of other things. So if you're a medium to large size business and you have a little bit of money to spend, please reach out to me and we can give you a quick connection to her. Now, the next thing is our YouTube channel. Subscribe now to that. We're currently growing in subscribers. Ring that bell and you can get easy updates on what's going on with this show. Final thing is the Roku channel. Now, the Roku channel is our newest thing out now. This will be on Roku as well. And we're essentially on Roku TV, Roku Box, and anywhere else you want to look there too. Now, the last thing I'd like to shout out here is Jimbo Paris Services. This is our service-based business. And what we do is we offer promotional content. We will essentially make ads for you, make content, and also interview people who are in your business for you and can help market you to that specific audience that you may need. I'm currently working with a few corporate businesses like General Electric, and so far they're fairly happy with the results I've given them. So that's about everything. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. I am Jimbo Paris, and this is the Jimbo Paris Show.
Thank you, Mr. Paris.
Thank you for listening to the Jimbo Paris Show.